In a small apartment building, 65-year-old retired teacher Alice Peterson discovered her grandmother's vintage jewelry box completely empty. Security footage revealed her recovering addict son Danny sneaking into her apartment at 2:47 a.m. with a suspicious bag. Alice had spent 40 years shaping young minds, known for fierce independence and belief in second chances. When faced with her son's apparent relapse, she made the heartbreaking decision to call police. What began as mother's worst fears would become a powerful revelation about sacrifice, miscommunication, and how families secretly protect each other. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Alice Peterson's morning routine had remained unchanged for the past 5 years. 6:30 sharp, tea kettle on the stove, 2 slices of whole grain toast, and her heart medication lined up beside the ceramic mug her husband Robert had given her on their 20th anniversary. The small apartment felt larger in the morning light. The cream-colored walls holding back the weight of another day stretched thin on Social Security, and a teacher's pension that seemed to shrink with each passing month. She moved through the ritual with practiced efficiency, her slippered feet whispering across the worn hardwood floors. The building's morning sounds filtered through thin walls. Mrs. Kowalski's television news, the young couple upstairs getting their toddler ready for daycare, the familiar creaks and sighs of a structure that had housed 3 generations of working families. Alice paused at her bedroom doorway, something nagging at the edge of her consciousness. The room looked exactly as she'd left it the night before. Bed made with hospital corners, Robert's reading chair positioned just so beside the window, her dresser top arranged with the same careful precision she'd maintained in her 4th-grade classroom for 40 years. But something was wrong. The jewelry box sat in its usual spot atop the dresser, the small mahogany chest with its delicate brass hinges that had belonged to her grandmother. Alice approached slowly, her heart already beginning its irregular flutter that the cardiologist had warned her about. The box was closed, appearing undisturbed, but as her fingers lifted the lid, the familiar weight of the hinges felt different somehow. Empty. The cream-colored velvet lining stared back at her, unmarked by the impressions that should have been there. Her grandmother's pearl necklace, the one she'd worn to her wedding. The gold bracelet with the tiny charms that told the story of 3 generations of Peterson women. The emerald ring that had survived the Depression and 2 world wars. Gone. All of it. Alice's hands trembled as she lifted the box, tilting it toward the morning light as if the jewelry might somehow be hiding in shadows. The rational part of her mind, the teacher who had spent decades solving problems and mediating disputes, began cataloging possibilities. Perhaps she'd moved them. Perhaps she'd put them somewhere safe and forgotten. But even as she began searching, pulling out dresser drawers with increasing desperation, Alice knew. The jewelry hadn't been misplaced. It had been taken. She searched methodically at first, checking the obvious places: her purse, the kitchen drawer where she kept important papers, the small safe where she stored her insurance documents. Then frantically, pulling cushions from chairs, checking inside pillowcases, even looking in the refrigerator, with the wild hope that age might have confused her more than she'd realized. Nothing. Alice sank into Robert's chair, the leather cracked now but still holding the faint scent of his aftershave after all these years. Her chest felt tight, not the physical tightness that sent her to the emergency room last spring, but something deeper. The jewelry had been more than sentiment. Those pieces represented the only real value she possessed, the only thing standing between her and the kind of poverty that made choosing between medication and groceries a monthly reality. The conversation with Danny 3 weeks ago played back in her mind with cruel clarity. He'd been sitting right here in this room, in the wooden chair across from Robert's, his hands working nervously at the frayed edge of his work shirt. "Mom, if you ever need anything, I mean anything, you tell me, right?" She deflected then, the way she always did. "I'm fine, honey. Don't worry about your old mother." But Danny's eyes had lingered on the pill organizer beside her chair, the stack of medical bills she'd thought she'd hidden beneath a magazine. His expression had carried that particular weight she'd seen too often during his dark years. The look of a man calculating debts and finding the numbers didn't add up. Alice forced herself to stand, to think like the teacher she'd been. Evidence. Logic. There had to be an explanation that didn't lead where her heart was already going. The building had security cameras. She'd complained about them when they were installed 2 years ago. An invasion of privacy, she'd called them. But Mr. Petrov, the building manager, had insisted they were necessary. For insurance, he'd said. For everyone's protection. The small monitor in the building's entryway showed a week's worth of footage. Alice's hands shook as she scrolled through the digital timeline, fast-forwarding through days of tenants coming and going, delivery trucks, the occasional visitor. There. Tuesday night, 2:47 a.m. Danny's figure appeared on the grainy screen, moving carefully through the hallway. He wore the same work clothes she'd seen him in 100 times, but his posture was different, furtive, guilty. He carried a small duffel bag, the kind he used to take to the gym, before the addiction took that away too. Alice watched her son approach her apartment door, watched him use his key, the key she'd given him 3 years ago when he got out of rehab, when she'd believed with desperate hope that this time would be different. Watched him disappear inside for 23 minutes before emerging again, the bag now hanging differently at his side. Heavier. She replayed the footage 3 times, each viewing confirming what she didn't want to believe. The timestamp burned itself into her memory, 2:47 a.m. The same night she'd taken an extra sleep aid because her back had been bothering her. The same night she'd slept through whatever sounds Danny might have made, moving through her apartment. Alice returned to her own apartment and sat at the kitchen table where she'd graded thousands of papers, where she'd helped Danny with homework when he was young and still believed his mother could fix anything. The phone sat before her, black and accusatory. She'd made this call before. 8 years ago, when Danny had stolen her prescription medication and sold it. 5 years ago, when her credit cards had mysteriously maxed out and Danny had disappeared for 3 days. Each time, she'd told herself it was for his own good. Each time, she'd hoped it would be the wake-up call he needed. But this felt different. This felt final. The jewelry hadn't just been her security. It had been her connection to the women who came before her. The grandmother who raised 5 children during the Depression. The mother who worked 2 jobs to send Alice to college. Those pieces had survived wars and poverty, and the slow erosion of time. Danny had taken all of that. For what? Pills? Gambling debts? The same demons that had haunted him through his 30s. The ones she'd thought were finally quiet? Alice picked up the phone with hands that seemed to belong to someone else. The numbers felt heavy beneath her fingers. 911. 3 digits that would change everything. That would force her to admit what she'd spent 3 years trying to deny. That sometimes love wasn't enough. That sometimes a mother's faith couldn't save her child from himself. The dial tone buzzed in her ear as she hesitated, the phone halfway to her face. Through the kitchen window she could see the maple tree Robert had planted when they first moved in, its branches now thick enough to shade most of their small yard. 40 years of growth, of patient seasons building something lasting. Alice closed her eyes and made the call. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice cut through Alice's trembling resolve like a blade. She sat frozen at her kitchen table, the phone pressed to her ear, the words she'd rehearsed suddenly evaporating into the morning air. Hello? Do you have an emergency? Alice's voice cracked. I need to report a theft. Are you in immediate danger, ma'am? No, I'm safe. The word felt hollow. Clear identification, time-stamped footage. Does he have a key to your apartment, Mrs. Peterson? Yes, Alice admitted. I gave it to him when he got out of rehab. For emergencies. And the bag he's carrying? Alice watched her son on the screen, noting the way he held the small duffel bag. Carefully, as if it contained something precious rather than stolen. I don't know what's in it. We'll need to speak with Danny, Santos said, straightening. Do you know where he is now? He works construction, but... Alice glanced at the lobby clock. It's Saturday. He might be here, actually. He sometimes uses the laundry room in the basement, when his apartment's machines are broken. Rodriguez was already moving toward the basement stairs, eager to make what seemed like a straightforward arrest. But Santos lingered, studying Alice's face in the flickering light of the security monitor. Mrs. Peterson, is there anything else you think we should know? Anything about Tuesday night? Or about Danny's recent behavior? Alice hesitated, that nagging memory of the pawnshop visit trying to surface again. But the fog of stress and emotion kept it buried, and she was no longer sure if it was real or wishful thinking. He's been asking about money lately, she said instead. About whether I needed help with bills. I told him I was fine, but… She gestured helplessly at their surroundings. The building that had seen better days, her carefully mended clothing, the obvious signs of someone making do on too little. Santos nodded, filing away the information alongside her growing sense that this case was more complicated than it appeared. In her experience, family thefts were messy, emotional affairs where the lines between victim and perpetrator often blurred. But there was something in Alice's manner, in the way she spoke about her son, that suggested layers of story still waiting to be uncovered. The sound of Rodriguez's voice echoed up the basement stairs. Found him. Danny Peterson? Alice's heart clenched at the sound of her son's name being called by a police officer. She followed Santos down the narrow staircase, each step feeling like a betrayal of everything she'd taught him about trust and family and doing the right thing. The basement laundry room was small and poorly lit, the air heavy with detergent and dampness. Danny stood beside one of the industrial washers, a basket of clothes at his feet, and an expression of complete bewilderment on his face. I'm Officer Rodriguez. We need to speak with you about some missing jewelry. Alice watched her son's face, searching for signs of the guilt she expected to see. Instead, Danny's confusion seemed genuine, his eyes moving from the officers to his mother with an expression that tore at her heart. Mom? Danny's voice cracked slightly. What's going on? What jewelry? The question hit Alice like a physical blow. Either her son was an accomplished liar, or she had made a terrible mistake. But the security footage didn't lie. The empty jewelry box didn't lie. Someone had taken her grandmother's pieces, and Danny was the only person with access to her apartment. Santos stepped forward, her experienced eye cataloging Danny's reaction. No defensive posturing, no attempt to run or deflect. Just confusion, and what appeared to be genuine concern for his mother. Mr. Peterson, your mother discovered some valuable family jewelry missing from her apartment. Security footage shows you entering her building early Wednesday morning. Can you tell us about that? Danny's brow furrowed as he processed the question. Wednesday? Yeah, I was here Tuesday night. Mom had mentioned her back was hurting, so I brought some of that heating gel she likes. But I didn't take anything. Why would I? His words stopped abruptly as the implications hit him. You think I stole from my own mother? The hurt in Danny's voice was so raw, so immediate, that Alice felt her certainty waver. This wasn't the defensive anger of someone caught in a lie. This was the devastation of someone facing false accusation from the person who mattered most. The footage shows you carrying a bag. Rodriguez pressed, his procedural mind focused on the evidence. Yeah, Danny's eyes found his mother's, and Alice saw something she hadn't expected. Disappointment. Not in being caught, but in being suspected. Mom, you really think I would steal from you? After everything we've been through, everything I've worked for in recovery? Alice's world tilted slightly. The security footage was real. The missing jewelry was real. But looking at her son's face, she began to wonder if her interpretation of those facts was wrong. Then explain the bag, Rodriguez demanded. Explain why you were in your mother's apartment at nearly 3 a.m. Danny's answer would change everything, though Alice didn't know it yet. The truth was more complex than either theft or innocence, woven from love and sacrifice and the lengths to which family members will go to protect each other, even when that protection is neither asked for nor understood. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Danny's hands trembled as he stared at the 2 police officers, then at his mother. The fluorescent lights in the laundry room cast harsh shadows across his face, emphasizing the deep lines that 3 years of sobriety hadn't completely erased. When he spoke, his voice carried the careful control of someone who'd learned not to let emotions escalate situations. I brought Mom some things she needed, he said quietly, his eyes never leaving Alice's face. The heating gel for her back, some groceries she'd run out of, and… He paused, swallowing hard. And some money I'd saved up. I know she's too proud to ask for help, but I can see she's struggling. Rodriguez's pen hovered over his notebook. What kind of money? Cash. About $400. Danny's voice grew quieter. I've been working overtime, picking up weekend shifts. I sold my gaming system, my bike. Some tools I don't really need anymore. I wanted to help with her medication costs. Alice felt something cold settle in her stomach. She remembered finding an envelope on her kitchen counter Wednesday morning, thinking it was junk mail and setting it aside without opening it. It was still there, buried under a stack of bills she hadn't had the courage to face. Santos watched the interplay between mother and son, her trained eye catching subtleties that Rodriguez was missing. Danny's body language spoke of hurt, not guilt. His shoulders had drawn inward, not in the defensive crouch of someone caught lying, but in the protective posture of someone trying to shield himself from emotional pain. Mr. Peterson, Santos said gently, your mother's jewelry is missing. The security footage shows you in her apartment around the time we believe it was taken. Danny's confusion deepened, his brow furrowing as he processed this information. What jewelry? Mom, what are they talking about? My grandmother's pieces, Alice whispered, her certainty beginning to crack under the weight of her son's obvious bewilderment. The pearl necklace, the gold bracelet, the emerald ring. They were in my jewelry box, and now they're gone. Danny stared at his mother for a long moment, and Alice watched as understanding and devastation dawned across his features. You think I took Grandma's jewelry? It wasn't a question. The words fell between them like stones into still water, sending ripples of hurt in all directions. Danny, You really think I would steal from you? His voice broke slightly on the last word. After 3 years. After everything I've done to earn back your trust. Santos stepped forward slightly, sensing the conversation was about to spiral beyond her ability to mediate. She'd seen this before. Families destroying each other with assumptions and accusations. Love and distrust tangling into knots that took years to untie. Let's all take a breath, she suggested. Mr. Peterson, I understand this is upsetting, but we need to know. Danny's voice was stronger now, though tears had begun to gather in his eyes. Do you have any idea what it's like to spend 3 years proving you're not the person you used to be? To show up every day? To work every overtime shift? To go to meetings and therapy and do everything right, just hoping that someday the people you love might trust you again? Alice felt each word like a physical blow. She wanted to explain about the empty jewelry box, about the security footage, about all the logical reasons she'd had for suspecting him. But looking at her son's face, really looking at it, she began to see the man he'd become rather than the addict he'd been. Rodriguez, less attuned to the emotional undercurrents, pressed forward with his questioning. The bag, Mr. Peterson. What exactly was in the bag when you left your mother's apartment? Danny wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, a gesture so achingly familiar that Alice remembered him as a little boy, crying over a scraped knee or a broken toy. Dirty laundry, he said flatly. I'd been working double shifts all week, and my apartment building's machines were broken again. I brought it here to wash. He gestured toward the industrial washers around them. I do laundry here sometimes when Mom's asleep, so I don't bother her. Santos felt pieces of the puzzle shifting in her mind. You do laundry here regularly? Yeah. The machines in my building are always broken. And Mom doesn't mind. I usually come late so I don't wake her up, and I have my own detergent. Danny looked around the familiar space. I've been doing it for months. Alice felt the floor shifting beneath her feet. She remembered finding the basement door propped open some mornings, assuming it was careless tenants. She remembered the faint sound of the washers running at odd hours, thinking it was inconsiderate neighbors. Mr. Peterson, Santos continued, her voice gentle but probing. You mentioned bringing your mother money. How often do you do that? Danny's eyes flicked to Alice, and she saw shame there. Not the shame of theft, but the shame of a son who knew his mother was struggling and felt helpless to fix it. "Whenever I can," he admitted. "She won't take it directly, so I leave it where she'll find it. Sometimes in her purse, sometimes on the kitchen counter. She always finds excuses to give it back, but I keep trying." Alice's mind raced backward through recent weeks. The $20 bill she'd found in her coat pocket, thinking it was change she'd forgotten. The grocery money that had appeared on her dresser, which she'd assumed was from cashing in loose change. The small amounts that had shown up in unexpected places, always when her finances were most strained. Rodriguez looked up from his notes, his procedural training warring with the evidence that this wasn't playing out like a typical family theft. "Mrs. Peterson, are you certain about the timeline? When exactly did you last see the jewelry?" The question hung in the air like smoke, and Alice felt the weight of doubt settling over her. When had she last actually seen the jewelry? She opened the box every morning as part of her routine, but did she really look at the contents? Or had she simply assumed they were there because they always had been? Alice's voice faltered. "I check the box every morning, but I don't always. I don't take the pieces out every day." Santos caught the hesitation immediately. "Mrs. Peterson, is it possible the jewelry went missing before Tuesday night?" The question Alice had been avoiding forced its way to the surface. Tuesday. The Medicare denial. The panicked calculations of medication costs versus grocery money. The desperate decision that had felt like betraying everything her grandmother had stood for. "Mom?" Danny's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "Are you okay? You look pale." Alice stared at her son, really looked at him, and saw not the hollow-eyed addict who had haunted her nightmares for years, but a man trying desperately to take care of his aging mother. His work clothes were clean but worn, his hands calloused from honest labor, his eyes clear and concerned. "I need to sit down," she whispered. Santos immediately moved to support her, recognizing the signs of someone whose world was reshaping itself. "Let's go back upstairs, Mrs. Peterson. We can continue this conversation in your apartment." As they climbed the narrow stairs, Danny close behind them, Alice felt the terrible certainty of her accusation beginning to crumble. The security footage was real, but perhaps her interpretation had been colored by old fears and defensive pride. Back in her apartment, Santos guided Alice to Robert's chair while Danny hovered nearby, his concern for his mother warring with his hurt at being suspected. "Mrs. Peterson," Santos said carefully, settling onto the couch across from her, "I'd like you to think very carefully about when you last actually saw the jewelry pieces. Not when you last looked at the box, but when you last saw the actual necklace, bracelet, and ring." Alice closed her eyes, trying to push through the fog of stress and emotion. The pearl necklace, when had she last taken it out, held it, remembered her grandmother's stories about wearing it to church dances during the war? "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. It could have been weeks ago." Rodriguez looked up from his notebook, his certainty in the case beginning to waver. "Are you saying the jewelry might have been missing longer than you initially thought?" Alice's hands shook as the memory she'd been suppressing finally broke through. Tuesday morning. The Medicare denial letter. The frantic drive to Chen's pawn shop with the jewelry wrapped in her grandmother's silk scarf. "Oh, God," she breathed, the full weight of her mistake crashing over her like a wave. "Oh, Danny, what have I done?" Santos leaned forward, her instincts telling her they were finally approaching the truth. "Mrs. Peterson, do you remember something about Tuesday?" Alice looked at her son, seeing the confusion and hurt in his eyes, and felt her heart break all over again. She had accused him of theft when he had been trying to help her. She had called the police on her own child when he was working double shifts and selling his possessions to ease her financial burden. "I pawned it," she whispered. "I pawned the jewelry on Tuesday morning to pay for my heart medication. I completely forgot. When I saw the empty box this morning, I just assumed." The silence that followed was deafening. Danny stared at his mother, his hurt transforming into something deeper, not anger, but a profound sadness that spoke to years of mistrust and assumptions. You forgot you pawned your grandmother's jewelry, he said slowly, but you remembered to suspect me. Alice felt the truth of his words like a knife to her chest. She had been so quick to assume the worst of him, so ready to believe that 3 years of sobriety and hard work could be erased in a single night. Santos watched the family dynamic with professional detachment and personal sympathy. She had seen addiction tear families apart, but she had also seen the long, difficult work of rebuilding trust. This moment represented both the fragility and the resilience of those bonds. "Mr. Peterson," she said gently, "I think we need to understand exactly what happened Tuesday night from your perspective." Danny was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on his mother. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 3 years, spent proving himself worthy of love and trust. "I brought Mom money because I knew she was struggling but was too proud to ask for help. I brought her heating gel because she mentioned her back was bothering her. I brought my laundry because my machines were broken and I didn't want to bother her during the day." He paused, his voice growing quieter. "I've been coming here at night for months, trying to take care of her without making her feel like she needs taking care of." Alice began to cry, not the tears of betrayal she'd shed earlier, but tears of recognition and regret. Her son had been protecting her pride, while she'd been protecting herself from disappointment, and in the space between their mutual protection, trust had withered. Santos made a decision that would shape the rest of the investigation. Rather than proceeding with an arrest based on the initial evidence, she chose to dig deeper, sensing that the truth was far more complex than a simple case of family theft. "Mrs. Peterson," she said, "I think we need to take a trip to the pawn shop." The suggestion to visit the pawn shop hung in the air like a lifeline, offering a path toward truth that might salvage what remained of the Peterson family's fractured trust. Alice wiped her tears with trembling hands, while Danny stood frozen beside the kitchen table, processing the revelation that his mother had pawned her grandmother's jewelry rather than accept his help. Santos recognized the critical moment they'd reached. The case was far from closed, despite Alice's admission. Years of police work had taught her that family dynamics were rarely simple, and the emotional undercurrents in this small apartment suggested layers of story that needed careful excavation. "Before we go anywhere," Santos said, her voice gentle but authoritative, "I'd like to speak with both of you separately." Sometimes individual conversations help clarify details that get lost in group discussions. Rodriguez looked up from his notebook, ready to object to what seemed like an unnecessary complication, but Santos's steady gaze silenced him. She had taken point on this investigation, and her instincts were telling her to slow down, to understand rather than simply arrest. "Mr. Peterson?" Santos continued, "Would you mind waiting in the hallway while I speak with your mother briefly?" Danny hesitated, his protective instincts warring with his hurt. "She doesn't have to answer any questions without me here." "Danny," Alice said quietly, finding her voice again. "It's okay. Go ahead." As Danny reluctantly stepped into the hallway, Santos pulled a chair closer to Alice, creating an intimate space for conversation. Rodriguez positioned himself by the window, giving them privacy while maintaining his official presence. "Mrs. Peterson," Santos began, "I need you to help me understand your financial situation. Not for the report, but because I think it's connected to everything that's happened here." Alice stiffened slightly, her pride reflexively rising against the invasion of privacy. But looking at Santos's kind eyes, she recognized genuine concern rather than professional curiosity. "I manage," Alice said carefully, "Social Security, a small teacher's pension. It's not much, but it's enough." Santos leaned forward slightly. "Is it enough for your medication?" The question hit its mark. Alice's composure cracked again, and she found herself explaining the Medicare denial, the impossible choice between her heart medication and basic necessities, the desperate trip to Chen's pawn shop that she'd hidden from Danny to protect his sobriety and her own dignity. "He's worked so hard to get clean," Alice whispered. "I didn't want him to know how bad things had gotten. I didn't want him to feel responsible, or worse, to think that his past problems had somehow caused my current ones." Santos nodded, understanding beginning to form. "And Danny's been trying to help you financially?" "I keep finding money," Alice admitted. Small amounts in my purse, on the counter, in my coat pockets. I always assumed it was change I'd forgotten about, but now. She trailed off, the pattern suddenly clear. Through the kitchen window, Santos could see Danny pacing in the hallway, his agitation evident in every step. When she called him back in, his face was set with the determined expression of someone who had made a difficult decision. "I need to tell you something," Danny said before Santos could speak. "About Tuesday night, and about the last few months." Santos gestured for him to sit, but Danny remained standing, his hands working nervously at the hem of his work shirt. "I've been leaving Mom money for weeks," he began. "Not just Tuesday. Every time I get paid. Every time I pick up an extra shift. I try to help. She always finds ways to give it back, but I keep trying because I can see she's struggling." Rodriguez looked up from his notes. "How much money are we talking about?" "Whatever I can spare. Sometimes $50, sometimes more. I sold my PlayStation, my mountain bike, some tools from when I was doing side jobs before I got the foreman position." Danny's voice grew quieter. "I've been sleeping on an air mattress for 2 months because I sold my bed frame, but Mom needed the money more than I needed furniture." Alice stared at her son, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in years. Not the addict who had stolen from her, not the burden she'd carried through his dark years, but a man who had quietly sacrificed his own comfort to ease her struggles. The sound of heavy footsteps on the apartment building's stairs interrupted the moment. A voice called out from the hallway, gruff but concerned. "Danny? You up here? Mrs. Chen called and said there were cops at your mom's place." Santos opened the door to reveal a stocky man in his late 30s, wearing work clothes similar to Danny's. His face bore the weathered look of someone who'd spent years in construction, but his eyes held the particular sharpness of someone who'd fought his own battles with addiction and won. "Tommy," Danny said, relief evident in his voice. "What are you doing here?" Tommy Ramirez stepped into the apartment, his presence immediately filling the small space with an aura of protective authority. Santos recognized the type: a sponsor, a mentor, someone who'd taken responsibility for another person's recovery journey. "Mrs. Chen was worried," Tommy explained, nodding respectfully to Alice before turning to the officers. "She said you were asking about Danny and some jewelry. I told her there had to be some mistake." Santos studied Tommy's face, reading the defensive loyalty of someone prepared to vouch for his friend. "You're Danny's supervisor?" "Supervisor and sponsor," Tommy confirmed. "Been working with Danny for 3 years, both on the job site and in recovery. If you think he stole from his mother, you're barking up the wrong tree." Rodriguez stepped forward, his notebook ready. "Can you account for Mr. Peterson's whereabouts and behavior recently?" Tommy's laugh was short and humorless. "Account for it? Hell, I've been trying to get him to slow down. Danny's been working every overtime shift I can give him, plus weekends, plus he's been picking up side jobs during his lunch breaks. Been worried he was going to burn himself out." Santos felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. "Side jobs?" "Small stuff. Moving furniture, cleaning construction debris, whatever pays cash." Tommy looked at Danny with something between pride and exasperation. Been trying to tell him he doesn't have to work himself to death to prove he's changed, but he won't listen. Alice felt the weight of understanding settle over her like a blanket. Her son hadn't been stealing from her. He'd been trying to save her. While she'd been hiding her financial struggles to protect his recovery, he'd been quietly sacrificing everything to support her, both of them trapped in a cycle of well-intentioned deception. "There's more," Danny said quietly, his eyes fixed on his mother. "About Tuesday night. I wasn't just bringing you money and doing laundry." Santos waited, sensing they were finally approaching the complete truth. "I'd been saving up to buy back your jewelry," Danny continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I knew you'd pawned it, Mom. I saw you leaving Chen's shop that morning, carrying Grandma's silk scarf. I followed up later and found out what you'd done." Alice's hand flew to her mouth, understanding flooding through her like a tide. "I've been working extra shifts, selling my stuff, trying to get enough money together to buy it back before you noticed it was gone. Tuesday night, I counted what I had saved, and I was still about $200 short." Danny's voice broke. "I was going to ask Tommy for an advance on my pay, or maybe take out a small loan. I wanted to surprise you, to give you back the jewelry so you'd never have to worry about losing it again." The room fell silent, except for the sound of Alice's quiet sobs. Santos looked between mother and son. Seeing the tragic irony of two people who loved each other so much, they'd hidden their struggles to avoid causing pain, only to create a deeper wound through their silence. Tommy placed a heavy hand on Danny's shoulder. "This is why you've been working yourself ragged. Not for drugs, not for gambling, but to buy back your mother's jewelry." Santos made a decision that would reshape the entire investigation. This wasn't a case of theft. It was a case of a family torn apart by love, pride, and the impossible economics of aging and recovery in modern America. "Mrs. Peterson, Mr. Peterson," she said formally, "I think it's time we all took a trip to Chen's pawn shop and straightened this out once and for all." The walk to Chen's pawn shop took less than 10 minutes, but it felt like a funeral procession. Alice moved slowly, leaning heavily on Danny's arm while Santos and Rodriguez flanked them like protective escorts. Tommy had volunteered to come along, his presence serving as both moral support for Danny and witness to whatever revelations awaited them. The neighborhood around the pawn shop bore the familiar marks of economic transition: family businesses wedged between empty storefronts, hand-painted signs advertising services in multiple languages, the quiet dignity of working people making do with less. Alice had walked these streets for decades, first as a young teacher renting her first apartment, later as a wife and mother, now as a widow navigating the harsh mathematics of fixed-income survival. Chen's pawn shop occupied the ground floor of a narrow brick building, its windows filled with the accumulated treasures and desperate surrenders of 3 generations of neighbors. Musical instruments hung beside power tools, jewelry cases shared space with electronics, and everything bore the slightly dusty patina of lives in transition. Mrs. Chen looked up from behind her counter as the unusual group entered, her sharp eyes immediately assessing the situation. At 72, she had learned to read people's stories and the items they brought to sell and the manner in which they carried their desperation. "Officer Santos," Mrs. Chen said, her English still carrying traces of her childhood in Taiwan, "I wondered when you might come by. Danny told me about his mother's situation." Alice felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. The admission of her financial struggles to a neighbor, even one as discreet as Mrs. Chen, represented a failure of the independence she'd maintained so fiercely since Robert's death. Santos approached the counter with professional courtesy. "Mrs. Chen, we're investigating a reported theft, but we believe there may have been some confusion about missing jewelry. Mrs. Peterson here believes her grandmother's pieces were stolen from her apartment." Mrs. Chen's expression shifted from polite attention to gentle understanding. She looked at Alice with the compassion of someone who had witnessed countless similar stories over her 3 decades in business. "Mrs. Peterson," she said softly, "you brought your grandmother's jewelry here on Tuesday morning. The pearl necklace, the gold bracelet with charms, and the emerald ring. Beautiful pieces. I remember because you were so careful with them, wrapping them in that silk scarf." The words hit Alice like a physical blow, confirmation of what she'd been trying to remember since that morning's discovery. The Medicare denial, the frantic drive to the pawn shop, the careful unwrapping of each piece while Mrs. Chen assessed their value with respectful efficiency. "I gave you $350, Mrs. Chen continued, her voice matter-of-fact but kind. "You said it was temporary, that you hoped to come back for them soon. I told you they would be safe, that I would hold them as long as I could." Rodriguez stepped forward, his notebook ready to record the official confirmation that no theft had occurred. But Santos was more interested in the human story unfolding before them. "Mrs. Chen," Santos said, "has anyone else asked about these particular pieces?" A small smile crossed Mrs. Chen's weathered face. She moved to a file cabinet behind the counter, withdrawing a thick folder filled with receipts and transaction records. "Danny has been here 4 times in the past 3 weeks, she said, producing several handwritten receipts. Each time he asked about buying back his mother's jewelry. Each time, I had to tell him he didn't have enough money yet." Alice turned to stare at her son, seeing his embarrassment and determination in equal measure. Danny's face had gone pale, his secret mission now exposed to everyone in the small shop. "The first time, he had only $60, Mrs. Chen continued, consulting her records. "He was so disappointed. He asked me to hold the pieces, promised he would be back with more money. He said his mother didn't know he was trying to buy them back, that it was supposed to be a surprise. Tommy placed a protective hand on Danny's shoulder, his own eyes bright with emotion. In 3 years of sponsorship, he had watched Danny rebuild his life piece by piece, but this level of selfless devotion represented something beyond mere recovery. It was redemption in its purest form. "When did he last come in?" Santos asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Tuesday night," Mrs. Chen replied. "Very late, after I had closed. He knocked on my door upstairs, apologizing for bothering me. He had been working all day and had picked up another side job moving furniture. He counted out $290, all small bills and loose change. Still not enough, but getting closer." Alice felt the room spinning around her. Tuesday night, the same night she had taken an extra sleep aid and slept through Danny's late-night visit to her apartment. He hadn't been stealing from her. He had been trying to restore what she'd been forced to sacrifice. Rodriguez looked up from his notes, the pieces of the investigation finally forming a complete picture. "So Mr. Peterson has been working to buy back jewelry that his mother pawned, without either of them knowing about the other's situation." "More than that," Mrs. Chen said, her expression growing more serious. "Danny told me about his mother's Medicare problems, about her heart medication. He asked if I knew any social services that might help, if there were any programs for seniors who couldn't afford their prescriptions." Santos felt the full weight of the family's tragedy settling over her. Alice had pawned her most precious possessions to pay for medication she needed to stay alive. Danny had been working himself to exhaustion trying to secretly restore those possessions, while also leaving money around his mother's apartment to ease her financial burden. Both of them had been protecting the other's dignity while sacrificing their own peace of mind. "There's something else," Mrs. Chen continued, moving to another section of her files. "Alice, when you brought the jewelry in, you mentioned that your son was in recovery, that you were proud of how hard he'd been working. You said you didn't want him to know about your financial troubles because you were afraid it might affect his sobriety." Alice nodded, tears streaming down her face. The memory was coming back clearly now. Her conversation with Mrs. Chen, the careful explanation of why she needed to pawn the jewelry discreetly, her fear that Danny's knowledge of her struggles might trigger a relapse. "And Danny," Mrs. Chen said, turning to him, "every time you came here, you talked about your mother, how she sacrificed everything for your recovery, how she deserved better than worrying about money in her retirement. You said she had already given up too much for your sake." The small pawn shop fell silent except for the ticking of an old clock on the wall. Santos looked around the group. Alice devastated by her misjudgment of her son. Danny overwhelmed by the exposure of his secret mission. Tommy witnessing the profound love that had motivated his friend's exhaustive work schedule. Rodriguez processing the paperwork implications of a case that had transformed from theft to family tragedy. Mrs. Chen broke the silence with the practical wisdom of someone who had mediated countless human dramas over the years. "Alice," she said gently, "your son has been working extra jobs for weeks trying to buy back your jewelry. He sold his furniture, his electronics, even his tools. He asked me to keep the pieces safe while he earned the money, and I agreed because I could see how much it meant to him." She paused, consulting her records one more time. "He's still about $100 short of the full amount needed to buy everything back, but he told me Tuesday night that he would have it by this weekend. He was planning to surprise you, to put the jewelry back in your box without you ever knowing it had been gone." Alice felt the crushing weight of her accusations settle fully upon her. She had called the police on her own son, had suspected him of theft, had watched his face crumble with hurt when he realized she didn't trust him. All while he had been working day and night to secretly restore the very items she thought he had stolen. Santos stepped forward, her role shifting from investigator to counselor. The case was solved, but the healing would take much longer. "Mrs. Peterson, Mr. Peterson," she said formally, "it's clear that no theft occurred. This appears to have been a misunderstanding, based on circumstances that neither of you fully understood." Rodriguez closed his notebook with a decisive snap. "Case closed. No charges will be filed. But Santos knew that the real work was just beginning. This family had been torn apart not by addiction or betrayal, but by love expressed in silence, by sacrifice made in secret, by the devastating economics that forced good people into impossible choices. Mrs. Chen moved to her jewelry case, withdrawing a familiar silk scarf that held Alice's grandmother's treasures. "Alice," she said quietly, "your jewelry is safe. And Danny, you have shown me something beautiful these past weeks, the kind of love that doesn't ask for recognition or gratitude." She looked at the police officers, then back at the family. "But now I think it's time for both of you to stop protecting each other in secret and start helping each other in the open." The journey back to Alice's apartment would be different from the walk to the pawn shop. The truth had been revealed, but now came the harder work of learning to trust, to communicate, and to accept that love sometimes means being vulnerable enough to ask for help. The walk back to Alice's apartment carried a weight different from their earlier journey to the pawn shop. Where before there had been tension and uncertainty, now there was the heavy silence of two people processing revelations that had fundamentally altered their understanding of each other and themselves. Santos walked slightly behind Alice and Danny, observing the careful distance they maintained between them. Danny's protective instincts kept him close enough to steady his mother if needed, but his hurt prevented him from offering his arm as naturally as he had before. Alice moved with the mechanical precision of someone whose world had been rebuilt in the span of an hour, her mind still catching up to the emotional aftermath of her terrible mistake. Rodriguez had volunteered to handle the paperwork back at the station, understanding that what the Peterson family needed now wasn't official procedure but space to heal. Tommy walked alongside them, his presence both supportive and watchful, the sponsor who had seen the fragility of recovery and knew how quickly trust, once broken, could shatter completely. As they reached Alice's building, Santos made a decision that went beyond her official duties. "I'd like to come up with you," she said gently. "Sometimes it helps to have someone neutral present when families work through difficult conversations." Alice nodded gratefully, while Danny's expression remained carefully controlled. The basement confrontation had exposed his deepest vulnerabilities. His fear of being mistrusted, his desperate need to prove his worth through sacrifice, his crushing disappointment that 3 years of sobriety hadn't been enough to earn his mother's faith in his character. Back in Alice's small apartment, the morning's coffee cups still sat on the counter, a reminder of how much had changed in just a few hours. Santos guided them to sit in the living room, positioning herself where she could see both their faces while maintaining a supportive distance. "Before we talk about what happens next," Santos began, "I think we need to acknowledge what we learned at the pawn shop. Alice, you pawned your grandmother's jewelry on Tuesday to pay for heart medication that Medicare had denied coverage for. Danny, you've been working overtime and selling your possessions to secretly buy back that same jewelry. Neither of you knew about the other's sacrifice." Alice's hands trembled in her lap. "I forgot," she whispered. "When I saw the empty jewelry box this morning, I completely forgot that I had pawned the pieces myself. I just saw Danny on that security footage, and I assumed—" "You assumed I had relapsed," Danny finished, his voice flat with hurt. "You assumed that 3 years of being clean, 3 years of showing up, 3 years of trying to be the son you deserved, that none of that mattered when something went missing." The words hung in the air like an accusation, and Alice felt each one as a physical blow. Santos recognized this as the crucial moment, the point where the family could either begin healing or allow their wounds to calcify into permanent resentment. "Danny," Santos said carefully, "your mother made an assumption based on past experience. It was wrong, but it came from a place of pain, not malice. Alice, your son has been working himself to exhaustion, trying to secretly restore something you had to sacrifice. Both of your actions came from love, even though they caused each other pain." Alice looked at her son, really seeing him for perhaps the first time since his recovery began. The hollow-eyed desperation of his addiction years had been replaced by the solid presence of a man who took responsibility seriously. His face bore the lines of someone who worked hard physically, but his eyes were clear and focused in a way they hadn't been for years. I sold my bed, Danny said quietly, not looking at his mother. I've been sleeping on an air mattress for 2 months because I sold my bed frame to get money for your jewelry. I sold my gaming system, my bike, my power tools. I've been picking up every overtime shift Tommy offers, plus weekend work, plus side jobs during lunch breaks. Tommy nodded, his expression grave. I kept telling him to slow down, that he was going to burn out. But he wouldn't listen. Now I understand why. Alice's composure finally cracked completely. The sobs that had been building since Mrs. Chen's revelations poured out of her, carrying 3 years of withheld worry, pride-driven silence, and the devastating realization of how much her son loved her. "You've been trying to take care of me," she managed through her tears. "And I've been so afraid of being a burden that I couldn't see it." Danny's own emotional walls began to crumble. "I know you don't trust me completely. I know I broke that trust so many times that 3 years probably isn't enough to fix it. But Mom, I need you to know that I would never steal from you again. I would rather live on the street than take anything from you." Santos felt the shift in the room's energy the moment when accusation began transforming into understanding. She had seen this before. The delicate transition when family members stopped defending their positions and started seeing each other's pain. "Alice," Santos said gently, "can you tell Danny about your Medicare situation? About why you needed to pawn the jewelry?" Alice wiped her eyes with shaking hands, looking at her son with a mixture of shame and love. "My heart medication, the generic version, isn't working as well as the brand name. My cardiologist warned me that my condition is getting worse, that I need the better medication to prevent another episode like I had last spring." Danny's face went pale. "What episode? Mom, what are you talking about?" The question revealed another layer of protective silence. Alice had hidden her emergency room visit from Danny, afraid that knowledge of her deteriorating health might trigger his anxiety and potentially threaten his recovery. "I collapsed in the grocery store in March," Alice admitted. "They kept me overnight for observation. The cardiologist said my current medication wasn't adequate anymore, but Medicare denied coverage for the better drug. I've been rationing what I have, trying to make it last longer." Danny stared at his mother in horror. "You had a heart episode and you didn't tell me. You've been rationing your heart medication?" "I didn't want to worry you. You've been doing so well, and I was afraid that if you knew how serious my health problems were getting, you were afraid I'd start using again," Danny finished, understanding flooding his features. "You thought that stress over your health would make me relapse." Tommy stepped forward slightly, recognizing the complex dynamics of family addiction recovery. "Alice, with respect, that's not how recovery works. Danny can't stay clean because his life is free of stress or problems. He stays clean because he's learned to handle stress and problems differently." Santos nodded, seeing an opportunity to address the fundamental miscommunication that had nearly destroyed this family. "Both of you have been trying to protect the other from reality. Alice, you hid your health and financial struggles to protect Danny's recovery. Danny, you worked in secret to ease Alice's burdens without her knowing. But protection turned into isolation, and isolation created the conditions for this misunderstanding." Danny moved closer to his mother, sitting on the edge of the coffee table so he could face her directly. "Mom, I need you to understand something. My recovery isn't that fragile anymore. Yes, stress can be a trigger, but so can feeling helpless, feeling like I can't be useful to the people I love. When you hide your problems from me, it makes me feel like you still see me as the addict who can't be trusted with real responsibility." Alice reached out tentatively, touching her son's work-calloused hand. "I see the man you've become," she whispered. "I'm just so afraid of losing you again that I can't bear the thought of adding to your burden. Taking care of you isn't a burden, Mom. It's a privilege. It's how I prove to myself that I'm not the selfish person I used to be." The words broke something open in Alice's chest, 3 years of withheld pride and gratitude spilling out at once. She pulled her son into a fierce embrace, both of them crying now, the accumulated weight of secrets and assumptions finally lifting. Santos watched the reunion with professional satisfaction and personal emotion. The case had officially been closed hours ago, But the real resolution was happening now, in this small apartment where two people were learning to trust each other with their vulnerabilities. "What happens now?" Alice asked, still holding Danny close. "About the jewelry, about the money you've already spent trying to buy it back?" Danny pulled away slightly, wiping his eyes. "We figure it out together. No more secrets, no more trying to protect each other by keeping silent. If you need medication, we find a way to get it. If I need to work extra to help, we discuss it openly." Tommy cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "There are programs for seniors who can't afford medication, Medicare appeals processes, ways to get help that don't require pawning family heirlooms or working yourself to death." Santos nodded. "I can put you in touch with social services, with organizations that help families navigate these systems. You don't have to handle this alone." Alice looked around the small circle of people who had gathered in her living room. Her son, whose love had been expressed through sacrifice she'd never recognized. Tommy, whose friendship had supported Danny through his darkest years. Santos, whose compassion had transformed a criminal investigation into a family intervention. "I'm sorry," she said to Danny, the words carrying the weight of 3 years of mistrust. "I'm sorry I didn't see how hard you've been working. I'm sorry I assumed the worst. I'm sorry I called the police on you." Danny took his mother's hands in both of his. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you about trying to buy back the jewelry. I'm sorry I let you struggle alone because I was too proud to admit I knew you needed help." Santos stood, recognizing that her official role was complete, but her human investment in this family's healing would continue. The Peterson family had work ahead of them, learning to communicate openly, accepting help from community resources, rebuilding trust on a foundation of honesty rather than protection. The jewelry would eventually make its way home, either through Danny's continued efforts or through family cooperation. But more importantly, Alice and Danny had found something more valuable than gold and pearls. They had found their way back to each other. The afternoon sun slanted through Alice's kitchen window, casting long shadows across the table where she and Danny now sat facing each other for the first time in 3 years, without the weight of unspoken secrets between them. Santos had positioned herself near the living room, close enough to provide guidance if needed, but far enough to give the family privacy for their long-overdue conversation. Tommy had taken a seat by the window, his presence both supportive and protective. As Danny's sponsor, he understood that this moment represented a crucial test of the communication skills Danny had been learning in recovery. The ability to discuss problems honestly, without shame or defensiveness, was foundational to maintaining sobriety, but it was also terrifying for someone whose past mistakes had taught him that honesty often led to disappointment and rejection. "I don't know where to start," Alice admitted, her hands wrapped around a fresh cup of tea that she'd made more for comfort than thirst. "There's so much I haven't told you, so much I've been trying to handle on my own." Danny leaned forward slightly, his work boots planted firmly on the linoleum floor. 3 years of recovery meetings had taught him to listen without immediately offering solutions, to let people share their truth without rushing to fix their problems. "Start wherever feels right, Mom. I'm not going anywhere." Alice studied her son's face, noting the patience there, the stillness that had replaced the restless energy of his addiction years. This wasn't the impulsive man who had once paced her apartment demanding money, whose presence had filled every room with the electric tension of barely controlled desperation. "The Medicare denial came in February," Alice began, her voice steadier now. "My cardiologist had been warning me for months that my current medication wasn't adequate anymore. My heart function has declined since the episode last spring, the one I didn't tell you about." Danny's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue. "The brand-name medication costs $800 a month without insurance coverage. Even with the Medicare appeal process, there was no guarantee they would approve it, and I was already rationing what I had left." Alice's fingers traced the rim of her teacup. "I started doing the math. How many days I could stretch each pill, whether I could skip doses on days when I felt stronger." "Jesus, Mom." The words escaped Danny before he could stop them, his composure cracking at the image of his mother calculating her life in pill fragments. Santos stepped closer, recognizing the need for gentle intervention. "Alice, that level of medication rationing is extremely dangerous for someone with your condition. Were you monitoring your symptoms?" I tried to, but some days I felt dizzy, or my chest would feel tight, and I didn't know if it was the medication issue or just normal aging. Alice looked at her son, seeing the fear in his eyes. I was scared, Danny. Not just of dying, but of being a burden, of costing you money you didn't have, of becoming another problem you'd have to manage while trying to stay clean. Tommy cleared his throat, drawing their attention. Alice, if I may, one of the things we learn in recovery is that secrets are toxic. They create isolation, shame, and they usually make problems worse rather than better. What you've been going through sounds incredibly frightening, but trying to handle it alone put both you and Danny in impossible positions. Danny nodded, his sponsor's words validating something he'd been struggling to articulate. Mom, when I was using, I lied all the time. I kept secrets because I was ashamed, because I didn't want people to know how bad things had gotten. But recovery taught me that secrets are what keep you sick. When you hide your problems from me, it feels like you're treating me the way I used to treat you, like someone who can't be trusted with the truth. The parallel hit Alice like a revelation. She had been protecting Danny the same way he had once protected her from the reality of his addiction, through lies of omission, through careful management of information, through the exhausting performance of being stronger than she actually was. I never thought of it that way, Alice said quietly. I thought I was being strong, being independent. I didn't want you to see me as weak or needy. But that's not how love works, Danny replied, reaching across the table to touch his mother's hand. Love means letting people see you as you really are, problems and all. You taught me that, actually, during one of my early recovery meetings when you came for Family Day. Alice remembered that meeting, the circle of folding chairs in the community center basement, the careful sharing of pain and hope, the moment when she'd realized that her son's addiction hadn't happened in isolation, but had affected everyone who loved him. You said something that day that stuck with me, Danny continued. You said that families get sick together, and they have to get well together. That supporting my recovery meant learning to be honest about how my addiction had affected you, instead of just pretending everything was fine. Santos moved closer, sensing an opportunity to guide the conversation toward practical solutions. It sounds like both of you understand the importance of honesty now. The question is how to implement that understanding going forward. Danny straightened in his chair, his expression becoming more serious. Mom, I need you to tell me everything about your health situation. Not just the heart medication, but all of it. What other issues are you dealing with? What appointments do you have coming up? What bills are you worried about? Alice hesitated. 40 years of teaching independence, warring with her growing understanding that isolation wasn't strength. It was fear disguised as virtue. My arthritis has been getting worse, she admitted. Some mornings I can barely get out of bed. I've been considering asking Dr. Martinez about physical therapy, but the copays add up quickly. And there's a cardiologist appointment next month that I've been putting off because of the cost. What about your regular medications? Not just the heart medicine, but everything else? I take 4 prescriptions regularly. The arthritis medication, blood pressure pills, something for cholesterol, and the heart medication. The first 3 are manageable with Medicare, but they still cost about $150 a month total. Danny did quick mental calculations, his construction worker's mathematical skills applied to the economics of aging. So you're looking at maybe $1,000 a month just for medications, not counting doctor visits or unexpected expenses. About that, yes, on top of rent, utilities, groceries, and everything else. My Social Security and pension cover the basics, but there's not much room for medical emergencies or expensive prescriptions. Santos pulled a chair up to the table, creating a more intimate circle. There are resources available for seniors in your situation, Alice. Medicare Part D appeals, pharmaceutical company assistance programs, local organizations that help with medication costs. But navigating those systems can be overwhelming when you're trying to do it alone. Tommy nodded in agreement. My mom went through something similar a few years ago. We found out about a program through the state that covered most of her expensive medications. But it took 3 different applications and about 6 months of paperwork. Danny leaned forward, his expression determined. What if we tackled this together? I could help with the paperwork, drive you to appointments, research programs. Not because you can't do it yourself, but because it's easier with two people. Alice felt a familiar surge of pride and independence. Danny, you already work so much. You shouldn't have to spend your free time managing my problems. But they're not just your problems anymore, Mom. That's what I'm trying to tell you. When you struggle alone, I end up working overtime and selling my furniture trying to secretly help you anyway. Wouldn't it be better if we just worked together from the beginning? The logic was undeniable, but Alice found herself grappling with a lifetime of conditioning that equated needing help with personal failure. Santos recognized the internal struggle playing out across Alice's features. Alice, there's a difference between being dependent and being supported. Dependent means you can't function without help. Supported means you have resources available when you need them. What Danny is offering sounds like support. And, Tommy added, it works both ways. Danny needs to feel useful, needs to feel like he's contributing positively to the people he loves. When you refuse his help, you're actually denying him something important for his recovery. Alice looked at her son, seeing not the addict who had once stolen from her, but the man who had been secretly sacrificing everything to ease her burdens. The realization that accepting his help might actually benefit his recovery as much as it would benefit her health created a shift in her thinking. Okay, she said finally, the word feeling both terrifying and liberating. But I have conditions. Danny's face lit up with relief and anticipation. Name them. First, we make decisions together. You don't go off and work yourself to death trying to solve problems without discussing them with me first. And I don't hide expenses or health issues from you because I'm worried about the impact on your recovery. Agreed. Second, we set boundaries about money. I appreciate that you want to help, but I need to maintain some independence. We work together to find solutions that don't require you to sacrifice your own well-being. Danny nodded enthusiastically. I can live with that. What else? Third, Alice's voice grew softer, more vulnerable. You have to promise me that if helping with my problems ever becomes a threat to your sobriety, you'll tell me immediately. Your recovery comes first, always. I couldn't live with myself if trying to take care of me caused you to relapse. The request revealed the depth of Alice's love and her continuing fears about her son's fragility. Tommy and Santos exchanged glances, recognizing the need to address this concern directly. Alice, Tommy said gently, recovery isn't about avoiding all stress or responsibility. In fact, having meaningful purpose, like helping take care of someone you love, can actually strengthen sobriety. Santos watched the reunion with professional satisfaction and personal emotion. The case had officially been closed hours ago, but the real resolution was happening now, in this small apartment where two people were learning to trust each other with their vulnerabilities. What happens now? Alice asked, still holding Danny close. About the jewelry, about the money you've already spent trying to buy it back? Danny pulled away slightly, wiping his eyes. We figure it out together. No more secrets, no more trying to protect each other by keeping silent. If you need medication, we find a way to get it. If I need to work extra to help, we discuss it openly. Tommy cleared his throat, drawing their attention. There are programs for seniors who can't afford medication, Medicare appeals processes, ways to get help that don't require pawning family heirlooms or working yourself to death. Santos nodded. I can put you in touch with social services, with organizations that help families navigate these systems. You don't have to handle this alone. Alice looked around the small circle of people who had gathered in her living room. Her son, whose love had been expressed through sacrifice she'd never recognized. Tommy, whose friendship had supported Danny through his darkest years. Santos, whose compassion had transformed a criminal investigation into a family intervention. I'm sorry, she said to Danny, the words carrying the weight of 3 years of mistrust. I'm sorry I didn't see how hard you've been working. I'm sorry I assumed the worst. I'm sorry I called the police on you. Danny took his mother's hands in both of his. I'm sorry I didn't tell you about trying to buy back the jewelry. I'm sorry I let you struggle alone because I was too proud to admit I knew you needed help. Santos stood, recognizing that her official role was complete, but her human investment in this family's healing would continue. The Peterson family had work ahead of them, learning to communicate openly, accepting help from community resources, rebuilding trust on a foundation of honesty rather than protection. The jewelry would eventually make its way home, either through Danny's continued efforts or through family cooperation. But more importantly, Alice and Danny had found something more valuable than gold and pearls. They had found their way back to each other. The afternoon sun slanted through Alice's kitchen window, casting long shadows across the table where she and Danny now sat facing each other for the first time in 3 years, without the weight of unspoken secrets between them. Santos had positioned herself near the living room, close enough to provide guidance if needed, but far enough to give the family privacy for their long-overdue conversation. Tommy had taken a seat by the window, his presence both supportive and protective. As Danny's sponsor, he understood that this moment represented a crucial test of the communication skills Danny had been learning in recovery. The ability to discuss problems honestly, without shame or defensiveness, was foundational to maintaining sobriety, but it was also terrifying for someone whose past mistakes had taught him that honesty often led to disappointment and rejection. "I don't know where to start," Alice admitted, her hands wrapped around a fresh cup of tea that she'd made more for comfort than thirst. "There's so much I haven't told you, so much I've been trying to handle on my own." Danny leaned forward slightly, his work boots planted firmly on the linoleum floor. 3 years of recovery meetings had taught him to listen without immediately offering solutions, to let people share their truth without rushing to fix their problems. "Start wherever feels right, Mom. I'm not going anywhere." Alice studied her son's face, noting the patience there, the stillness that had replaced the restless energy of his addiction years. This wasn't the impulsive man who had once paced her apartment demanding money, whose presence had filled every room with the electric tension of barely controlled desperation. "The Medicare denial came in February," Alice began, her voice steadier now. "My cardiologist had been warning me for months that my current medication wasn't adequate anymore. My heart function has declined since the episode last spring, the one I didn't tell you about." Danny's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue. "The brand-name medication costs $800 a month without insurance coverage. Even with the Medicare appeal process, there was no guarantee they would approve it, and I was already rationing what I had left." Alice's fingers traced the rim of her teacup. "I started doing the math. How many days I could stretch each pill, whether I could skip doses on days when I felt stronger." "Jesus, Mom." The words escaped Danny before he could stop them, his composure cracking at the image of his mother calculating her life in pill fragments. Santos stepped closer, recognizing the need for gentle intervention. "Alice, that level of medication rationing is extremely dangerous for someone with your condition. Were you monitoring your symptoms?" "I tried to, but some days I felt dizzy, or my chest would feel tight, and I didn't know if it was the medication issue or just normal aging." Alice looked at her son, seeing the fear in his eyes. "I was scared, Danny. Not just of dying, but of being a burden, of costing you money you didn't have, of becoming another problem you'd have to manage while trying to stay clean." Tommy cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "Alice, if I may, one of the things we learn in recovery is that secrets are toxic. They create isolation, shame, and they usually make problems worse rather than better. What you've been going through sounds incredibly frightening, but trying to handle it alone put both you and Danny in impossible positions." Danny nodded, his sponsor's words validating something he'd been struggling to articulate. "Mom, when I was using, I lied all the time. I kept secrets because I was ashamed, because I didn't want people to know how bad things had gotten. But recovery taught me that secrets are what keep you sick. When you hide your problems from me, it feels like you're treating me the way I used to treat you, like someone who can't be trusted with the truth." The parallel hit Alice like a revelation. She had been protecting Danny the same way he had once protected her from the reality of his addiction, through lies of omission, through careful management of information, through the exhausting performance of being stronger than she actually was. "I never thought of it that way," Alice said quietly. "I thought I was being strong, being independent. I didn't want you to see me as weak or needy." "But that's not how love works," Danny replied, reaching across the table to touch his mother's hand. "Love means letting people see you as you really are, problems and all. You taught me that, actually, during one of my early recovery meetings when you came for Family Day." Alice remembered that meeting, the circle of folding chairs in the community center basement. The careful sharing of pain and hope, the moment when she'd realized that her son's addiction hadn't happened in isolation, but had affected everyone who loved him. "You said something that day that stuck with me," Danny continued. "You said that families get sick together, and they have to get well together. That supporting my recovery meant learning to be honest about how my addiction had affected you, instead of just pretending everything was fine." Santos moved closer, sensing an opportunity to guide the conversation toward practical solutions. "It sounds like both of you understand the importance of honesty now. The question is how to implement that understanding going forward." Danny straightened in his chair, his expression becoming more serious. "Mom, I need you to tell me everything about your health situation. Not just the heart medication, but all of it. What other issues are you dealing with? What appointments do you have coming up? What bills are you worried about?" Alice hesitated. 40 years of teaching independence, warring with her growing understanding that isolation wasn't strength. It was fear disguised as virtue. "My arthritis has been getting worse," she admitted. "Some mornings I can barely get out of bed. I've been considering asking Dr. Martinez about physical therapy, but the copays add up quickly. And there's a cardiologist appointment next month that I've been putting off because of the cost. What about your regular medications? Not just the heart medicine, but everything else? I take 4 prescriptions regularly. The arthritis medication, blood pressure pills, something for cholesterol, and the heart medication. The first 3 are manageable with Medicare, but they still cost about $150 a month total." Danny did quick mental calculations, his construction worker's mathematical skills applied to the economics of aging. "So you're looking at maybe $1,000 a month just for medications, not counting doctor visits or unexpected expenses." "About that, yes, on top of rent, utilities, groceries, and everything else. My Social Security and pension cover the basics, but there's not much room for medical emergencies or expensive prescriptions." Santos pulled a chair up to the table, creating a more intimate circle. "There are resources available for seniors in your situation, Alice. Medicare Part D appeals, pharmaceutical company assistance programs, local organizations that help with medication costs. But navigating those systems can be overwhelming when you're trying to do it alone." Tommy nodded in agreement. "My mom went through something similar a few years ago. We found out about a program through the state that covered most of her expensive medications. But it took 3 different applications and about 6 months of paperwork." Danny leaned forward, his expression determined. "What if we tackled this together? I could help with the paperwork, drive you to appointments, research programs. Not because you can't do it yourself, but because it's easier with 2 people." Alice felt a familiar surge of pride and independence. "Danny, you already work so much. You shouldn't have to spend your free time managing my problems." "But they're not just your problems anymore, Mom. That's what I'm trying to tell you. When you struggle alone, I end up working overtime and selling my furniture trying to secretly help you anyway. Wouldn't it be better if we just worked together from the beginning?" The logic was undeniable, but Alice found herself grappling with a lifetime of conditioning that equated needing help with personal failure. Santos recognized the internal struggle playing out across Alice's features. "Alice, there's a difference between being dependent and being supported. Dependent means you can't function without help. Supported means you have resources available when you need them. What Danny is offering sounds like support. And," Tommy added, "it works both ways. Danny needs to feel useful, needs to feel like he's contributing positively to the people he loves. When you refuse his help, you're actually denying him something important for his recovery." Alice looked at her son, seeing not the addict who had once stolen from her, but the man who had been secretly sacrificing everything to ease her burdens. The realization that accepting his help might actually benefit his recovery as much as it would benefit her health created a shift in her thinking. "Okay," she said finally, the word feeling both terrifying and liberating. "But I have conditions." Danny's face lit up with relief and anticipation. "Name them." "First, we make decisions together. You don't go off and work yourself to death trying to solve problems without discussing them with me first. And I don't hide expenses or health issues from you because I'm worried about the impact on your recovery." "Agreed." "Second, we set boundaries about money. I appreciate that you want to help, but I need to maintain some independence. We work together to find solutions that don't require you to sacrifice your own well-being. Danny nodded enthusiastically. I can live with that. What else? Third, Alice's voice grew softer, more vulnerable. You have to promise me that if helping with my problems ever becomes a threat to your sobriety, you'll tell me immediately. Your recovery comes first, always. I couldn't live with myself if trying to take care of me caused you to relapse. The request revealed the depth of Alice's love and her continuing fears about her son's fragility. Tommy and Santos exchanged glances, recognizing the need to address this concern directly. Alice, Tommy said gently, recovery isn't about avoiding all stress or responsibility. In fact, having meaningful purpose, like helping take care of someone you love, can actually strengthen sobriety. The key is learning to handle challenges in healthy ways rather than avoiding them entirely. Santos nodded. What you're describing sounds like a partnership based on mutual support and honest communication. That's actually the healthiest dynamic for both of you. Danny reached across the table and took both of his mother's hands in his. Mom, taking care of you doesn't threaten my recovery. It gives me a reason to stay strong. But I promise that if I ever feel overwhelmed, I'll talk to Tommy or my counselor before making any major decisions. The conversation continued for another hour, covering practical details about Medicare appeals, medication assistance programs, and the logistics of coordinating Alice's medical care. Santos provided contact information for social services and senior support organizations, while Tommy shared resources from his own family's experience navigating similar challenges. As the afternoon wore on, Alice found herself marveling at the change in their dynamic. Instead of the careful dance of protection and suspicion that had characterized their relationship since Danny's recovery began, they were functioning as a team, identifying problems together, brainstorming solutions together, acknowledging their limitations and strengths with honest clarity. There's something else we need to talk about, Danny said as their practical planning wound down. The jewelry. I still want to buy it back, but maybe we can approach it differently now. Alice looked at her son, understanding that the jewelry had become more than just valuable objects. It represented his desire to restore what her struggles had forced her to sacrifice. What if we made it a joint project? She suggested. Not you working secret overtime to surprise me, but both of us saving toward getting the pieces back. Maybe we could even ask Mrs. Chen about a payment plan. Danny's smile was genuine and relieved. I'd like that, and maybe in the meantime, we could work on preventing situations where you'd need to pawn them again. Santos stood, recognizing that the immediate crisis had been resolved and that the family was now engaged in the healthy work of planning their future together. The case would officially be closed as a misunderstanding, but more importantly, Alice and Danny had found a way to transform their protective silences into supportive communication. I should let you two continue this conversation in private, Santos said, gathering her things. But I want to leave you with some resources, and I'd like to check in with you both in a few weeks to see how things are going. As Santos prepared to leave, Alice stood and embraced the officer, who had transformed what could have been a family tragedy into an opportunity for healing. Thank you, Alice whispered, not just for not arresting my son, but for helping us see each other clearly. Santos smiled, thinking of the countless family disputes she had mediated over the years. Few had ended with such genuine understanding and hope. The Peterson family had work ahead of them, practical challenges around healthcare and finances, emotional healing around trust and communication. But they now had something they had lacked that morning, a foundation of honesty upon which to build their future together. As the afternoon light began to fade, Alice and Danny continued their conversation, no longer mother and son dancing around each other's vulnerabilities, but two adults committed to facing their challenges as a team. 5 days after the police had left Alice's apartment, she found herself standing outside Chen's pawn shop with Danny beside her, both of them carrying the nervous energy of people about to take a significant step forward. The morning was crisp, with the promise of autumn, and Alice had chosen to wear her good sweater, the navy blue cardigan that Robert had bought her for their last anniversary together. You ready for this? Danny asked, though Alice could see in his expression that the question was as much for himself as for her. The past few days had been a whirlwind of honest conversations, practical planning, and the delicate work of rebuilding trust, that had been damaged by years of well-intentioned secrecy. "As ready as I'll ever be," Alice replied, adjusting her purse strap with hands that trembled only slightly. The envelope in her purse contained $360, money that Danny had insisted on contributing from his savings, combined with her own careful budgeting and the unexpected gift of $40 that had appeared on her kitchen counter Tuesday morning, finally recognized for what it was. The bell above the pawnshop door chimed as they entered, and Mrs. Chen looked up from her paperwork with the satisfied expression of someone who had been expecting this visit. "Alice, Danny," she greeted them warmly. "I wondered when you two might come in together." Alice felt her cheeks warm slightly, still adjusting to the idea that her financial struggles were no longer her private shame, but a family challenge to be addressed openly. "Mrs. Chen, we'd like to discuss buying back some of my grandmother's jewelry. Together this time." Mrs. Chen's smile deepened as she moved toward the secure case where Alice's pieces had been carefully stored. "I'm very glad to hear that word, together. The past few weeks, watching you both trying to solve the same problem separately, it reminded me of my own parents during the difficult years." Danny stepped closer to the counter, his work-rough hands clasped behind his back in a gesture Alice recognized from his childhood, the posture he'd assumed when trying to prove he could be trusted with something important. "We have $360, he said. "We know it's not enough for all three pieces, but we were hoping we could work out some kind of arrangement." Mrs. Chen retrieved the silk scarf that held Alice's grandmother's treasures, unwrapping each piece with the reverence they deserved. The pearl necklace caught the morning light streaming through the shop windows, its luminescence seeming to carry the weight of all the women who had worn it before Alice. "These pieces," Mrs. Chen said thoughtfully, "they're worth more than their appraisal value to your family. The pearl necklace alone would normally cost $400 to buy back, but—" She paused, studying the faces of the mother and son before her. "I've been in this business for 30 years. I've seen families destroyed by pride and secrets. I've also seen families heal when they learn to work together." Alice felt tears gathering, though whether from gratitude or the overwhelming emotion of seeing her grandmother's jewelry again, she couldn't say. "What are you proposing?" Danny asked carefully. "Take the necklace today," Mrs. Chen said, lifting the pearls from their wrapping. "Pay me the $360 now, and we'll work out a payment plan for the other two pieces. $25 a month until they're yours again. No interest, just the balance of what you owe." Alice's hand flew to her throat, where the pearls had rested on her wedding day, on Danny's graduation from high school, on every important occasion when she'd needed to feel connected to the generations of strong women who had come before her. "Mrs. Chen, that's incredibly generous," Alice managed. "It's good business," Mrs. Chen replied with a slight shrug. "Families that work together are families that don't need to pawn their treasures. This way you get your grandmother's necklace back, I eventually get paid in full, and everyone learns something about asking for help when they need it." Danny pulled out his wallet, counting out the bills they'd carefully organized that morning. "Mrs. Chen, I want you to know that this arrangement, it means everything to us. Not just the jewelry, but the chance to do this together honestly." As Mrs. Chen completed the transaction, Alice found herself studying her son's profile. The past 5 days had revealed so much about the man he'd become during his recovery. His willingness to attend the Medicare appeals meeting with her. His patience in helping her navigate the confusing world of pharmaceutical assistance programs. His gentle insistence that they establish regular check-ins about both their emotional and financial well-being. "There's something else," Danny said as Mrs. Chen handed Alice the pearl necklace. "Mom's been having trouble with her arthritis, and she's been putting off physical therapy because of the cost. Do you know of any programs that might help with that?" The question surprised Alice, not because Danny had remembered her arthritis struggles, but because he'd asked about resources, rather than immediately offering to pay for her treatment himself. It represented a shift toward sustainable solutions rather than self-destructive sacrifice. Mrs. Chen nodded thoughtfully. "The community center 3 blocks from here offers a senior wellness program. Physical therapy, yoga classes, even some social activities. It's sliding scale based on income. My friend Ruth has been going there for 2 years now. Alice made a mental note to investigate the program, another step toward accepting that her needs were legitimate and that seeking help was practical rather than shameful. As they prepared to leave the pawn shop, Mrs. Chen called after them. Alice, Danny, what you've learned these past few days about working together instead of suffering alone? Don't forget that lesson when the next crisis comes. And there will be a next crisis. That's life. Walking home with the pearl necklace safely tucked in her purse, Alice reflected on the wisdom of Mrs. Chen's words. The Medicare appeal was still pending. Her arthritis wasn't going to improve on its own. Danny's commitment to his recovery required ongoing vigilance and support. But for the first time in years, these challenges felt manageable because she wasn't facing them alone. "Mom," Danny said as they paused at the crosswalk near Alice's building, "there's something I want to ask you about, and I'm not sure how you'll feel about it." Alice tensed slightly, old habits of worry surfacing. "What is it?" "I've been going to AA meetings for 3 years, but you've never really understood what that part of my recovery looks like. Tommy suggested that maybe you'd like to come to an open meeting sometime, not as someone who needs the program, but as family learning to support someone in recovery." The request caught Alice off guard. In all the years of Danny's addiction and recovery, she had maintained careful boundaries around his treatment, partly from respect for his privacy, and partly from her own discomfort with the raw honesty that recovery seemed to require. "I don't know anything about AA meetings," Alice admitted. "Would I have to speak? Would people expect me to share personal things?" Danny shook his head quickly. "Not at all. Open meetings welcome family members and friends just to observe and learn. There's no pressure to participate beyond listening. But I thought it might help you understand what my recovery actually looks like day to day, and maybe meet some of the people who've been supporting me." Alice considered the suggestion as they entered her building. The past week had been full of unfamiliar experiences, honest conversations about money, accepting help without shame, working as a team rather than as individuals protecting each other. Perhaps it was time to extend that openness to understanding Danny's recovery community. "When's the next meeting you'd be comfortable having me attend?" "Thursday evening at 7. It's at the community center, the same place that has the senior wellness program Mrs. Chen mentioned. Tommy will be there, and probably some other people you'd like." Alice nodded slowly. "I'd like that. I think it's time I understood that part of your life better." The rest of their walk passed in comfortable silence, both of them processing the morning's successes and the plans taking shape for their shared future. Back in Alice's apartment, they settled at the kitchen table with the manila folder that had become their collaboration headquarters. Over the past few days, they had created a system for managing Alice's medical and financial needs, appointment schedules, medication lists, insurance paperwork, and contact information for various assistance programs. "The social worker called yesterday while you were at work," Alice reported, consulting her notes. "Sarah Martinez from the Area Agency on Aging. She has an opening this afternoon to meet about the Medicare appeal and some other programs I might qualify for." Danny looked up from his own notes, where he'd been tracking his overtime hours and budgeting for the monthly payments to Mrs. Chen. "That's great. Do you want me to come with you, or would you prefer to handle it independently?" The question represented the delicate balance they were still learning to navigate: Danny's desire to be supportive without being overbearing, Alice's need to maintain autonomy while accepting appropriate help. "I think I'd like you to come," Alice said after a moment's consideration. "Sarah mentioned that family involvement often helps with navigating the various programs, and honestly, you're better with paperwork than I am." It was a small admission, but significant in the context of Alice's lifelong pride in her organizational abilities. Acknowledging that Danny had skills that complemented her own felt like another step toward genuine partnership rather than protective independence. The afternoon meeting with Sarah Martinez took place in a small office in the County Services Building, where inspirational posters shared wall space with bulletin boards covered in resource information and program flyers. Sarah was a woman in her 40s with the patient demeanor of someone who specialized in helping seniors navigate complex bureaucratic systems. "Mrs. Peterson," Sarah began, reviewing the paperwork Alice had completed in advance. You're actually eligible for several programs that could significantly reduce your medication costs and provide additional support services. Alice felt Danny's presence beside her as both reassuring and legitimizing, evidence that her needs were important enough to warrant family involvement, that accepting help was a collaborative decision rather than a personal failure. The Medicare Part D appeal is definitely worth pursuing, Sarah continued. Your cardiologist's documentation is thorough, and denial reversals are common in cases like yours. But even if the appeal is unsuccessful, there are pharmaceutical assistance programs that could reduce your monthly costs by 60 to 80%. Danny leaned forward slightly. What kind of timeline are we looking at for these programs? The Medicare appeal should be resolved within 60 days. The pharmaceutical assistance can often be approved much faster, sometimes within 2 weeks if all the paperwork is complete. And Mrs. Peterson, you also qualify for the Senior Medicare Patrol Program, which provides advocates who can help you understand your benefits and identify potential errors in billing. Over the next hour, Sarah walked them through a maze of available resources: utility assistance programs, senior nutrition programs, transportation services for medical appointments, and the sliding scale community programs Mrs. Chen had mentioned. The key thing to remember, Sarah concluded, is that these programs exist precisely because society recognizes that seniors on fixed incomes face legitimate challenges that aren't personal failures. Using available resources is just practical planning. As they left the county building with a folder full of applications and contact information, Alice marveled at how different this experience felt from her solitary trip to the pawn shop weeks earlier. Instead of desperate secrecy, she now had a support system and a plan. I never knew so many programs existed, Alice admitted as they walked to Danny's truck. I didn't either, Danny replied. It makes me wonder how many people struggle alone because they don't know help is available, or because they're too proud to ask. The observation carried particular weight given their own recent experience with counterproductive pride and isolation. That evening, as they sat in Alice's living room working through the various applications, Danny brought up another topic that had been weighing on his mind. Mom, I've been thinking about our communication going forward. The past few days have been great, but I want to make sure we don't slip back into old patterns when the crisis feeling wears off. Alice looked up from the pharmaceutical assistance paperwork, recognizing the importance of Danny's concern. The intensive honesty of the past week had felt natural in the context of crisis resolution, but maintaining that openness during ordinary daily life might require more intentional effort. What do you have in mind? Maybe we could establish regular check-ins. Not just when problems come up, but ongoing conversations about how we're both doing, what challenges we're facing, what support we need from each other. Alice considered the suggestion, thinking about the decades of habit they were trying to change. Her instinct was still to minimize her problems and manage Danny's perception of her needs. His instinct was still to solve problems through sacrifice rather than communication. What would that look like practically? Maybe Sunday dinners here at your place, with a standing agenda item about the week ahead. Medical appointments, work schedules, financial planning, even emotional stuff if something's bothering either of us. The proposal felt both appealing and slightly terrifying to Alice. Regular, scheduled honesty represented a level of vulnerability she wasn't accustomed to, but the alternative, returning to the protective secrecy that had nearly destroyed their relationship, was far worse. I'd like to try that, she said finally, but I think we need some ground rules about boundaries and privacy. Just because we're being more open doesn't mean we can't have individual lives and problems that we handle independently when appropriate. Danny nodded enthusiastically. Absolutely. The goal isn't to eliminate all independence, just to make sure neither of us is suffering alone with problems that could be easier to handle together. As the evening progressed, they established other practical frameworks for their new partnership. Danny would help with transportation to medical appointments when his work schedule allowed, but Alice would also investigate the senior transportation services Sarah had mentioned. They would jointly manage Alice's medications and appointment schedules, but Alice would maintain primary responsibility for her own healthcare decisions. Most importantly, they agreed on strategies for handling future financial crises. Instead of Alice pawning belongings or Danny working secret overtime, they would immediately consult each other and explore available resources before making dramatic sacrifices. "There's something else," Danny said as they finished organizing the evening's paperwork. "Tommy mentioned that his AA group has been discussing family dynamics in recovery, and several people have said that family members often benefit from their own support groups. Not Al-Anon necessarily, but maybe some kind of community for people learning to balance independence with interdependence." Alice found the suggestion intriguing rather than threatening. The past week had shown her that isolation wasn't strength. It was a form of self-protection that ultimately became self-destructive. "I'll think about it," she said. "Maybe after I attend an A meeting with you and get more comfortable with the idea of sharing personal things in a group setting." Danny smiled, recognizing his mother's careful approach to new experiences. "No pressure, just an option if you ever think it might be helpful." As Danny prepared to leave for the evening, Alice walked him to the door with the pearl necklace draped around her neck. The familiar weight of the pearls felt like a benediction, a tangible reminder that some things could be restored through patience, honesty, and collaborative effort. "Danny," she said as he paused in the doorway, "I need you to know something. These past few days, working together, being honest about our problems, it's shown me what a remarkable man you've become, not just in recovery, but as a person. I'm proud of you in ways I don't think I've ever expressed clearly enough." Danny's eyes filled with tears. 3 years of uncertainty about his mother's trust finally resolved. "That means everything to me, Mom. Everything." As Alice watched her son drive away, she reflected on the distance they had traveled from that terrible morning when she'd called the police. The jewelry box on her dresser now held one restored treasure, with 2 more on their way home through honest effort and community support. But more importantly, the space between Alice and Danny, the careful distance they had maintained to protect each other from their respective vulnerabilities, had been replaced by something far more valuable than safety. They had found the courage to be genuinely known by each other, problems and all, and discovered that love expressed through truth was stronger than love expressed through protection. The work ahead would be ongoing, managing Alice's health issues, maintaining Danny's recovery, navigating the complex systems of healthcare and social services. But they now had something they had lacked for years, a foundation of trust built on honesty rather than assumptions. As Alice prepared for bed that night, the pearl necklace safely returned to its place in her jewelry box, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Not just hope for the future, but confidence in her ability to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Not because those challenges would be easy, but because she wouldn't be facing them alone. The morning's visit to Mrs. Chen's had restored more than jewelry. It had restored the possibility of genuine partnership between a mother and son who had learned, finally, that protecting each other was far less powerful than supporting each other. In the quiet of her small apartment, Alice could almost hear Robert's voice, approving of the man their son had become, and the woman she was still becoming. The Peterson family was healing, one honest conversation at a time. 1 month later, Alice Peterson stood at her kitchen window, watching the October evening paint her neighborhood in shades of gold and amber. The maple tree that Robert had planted 40 years ago was showing its autumn glory, and for the first time in years, Alice felt worthy of witnessing such beauty without the crushing weight of hidden struggles. The envelope from Medicare lay open on her kitchen counter, its contents representing more than approved medication coverage. It was validation that her needs were legitimate, that the system could work when approached with patience and proper support. Sarah Martinez had called that morning with the news, her voice bright with genuine pleasure at the successful appeal. "Your cardiologist's documentation was excellent," Sarah had said, and having Danny there to help organize everything made a real difference in the presentation. Alice smiled at the memory, touching the pearl necklace that now rested comfortably around her throat each day. The emerald ring had been returned to her jewelry box the previous week, with only the gold bracelet remaining at Mrs. Chen's shop, a final payment away from completing their family restoration project. The sound of Danny's truck pulling into the visitor parking drew Alice from her reflections. Through the window, She watched her son climb out of the vehicle with the confident posture of a man who had found his place in the world. The promotion to site supervisor had brought more than just additional income. It had given Danny a sense of professional pride that complemented his personal growth. "Mom?" Danny's voice carried up from the building entrance, followed by his familiar knock on her apartment door. "Coming," Alice called, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at her seemed lighter somehow, unburdened by the protective secrets that had weighed her down for so long. Danny entered, carrying grocery bags, and wearing the satisfied expression of someone whose day had gone well. The Sunday dinner tradition they had established had evolved into something both of them looked forward to. Not just the meal, but the ritual of honest conversation that came with it. "How was the Medicare office?" he asked, beginning to unpack ingredients for their planned chicken dinner. "Wonderful. Sarah walked me through everything, and I should have my new prescription cards within the week." Alice moved to help with the groceries, noting how natural this collaboration had become. "How was your first day as supervisor?" Danny's smile was genuine and unguarded. "Terrifying and amazing. Tommy was right. The crew respects me, and I actually know what I'm doing." We finished the Johnson project 2 days ahead of schedule. As they worked together preparing dinner, Alice marveled at the easy rhythm they had developed. No longer the careful dance of protection and suspicion, but the comfortable choreography of two people who trusted each other with both their strengths and their limitations. "There's something I want to show you," Alice said as they sat down to eat. She retrieved a small wooden box from the living room, one that Danny had never seen before. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, were photographs spanning 3 generations. Alice's grandmother wearing the pearl necklace at her own wedding. Alice's mother in the emerald ring on graduation day. Alice herself in all 3 pieces on the night Danny was born, radiant with new motherhood and hope for the future. "I thought it was time you understood the real history of these pieces," Alice said, spreading the photographs across the table. "They've been through wars and depressions, celebrations and sorrows. But they've always represented the same thing, the strength of women who faced their challenges together." Danny studied the photographs with reverence, seeing his family's story in the continuity of these treasures. "I never knew Grandma wore them to her wedding." "She did. And she told me that her mother wore them when she came to America, carrying them in a sewing basket through Ellis Island." Alice touched the pearls at her throat. "When I pawned them, I felt like I was betraying that legacy. But I've realized something. The real legacy isn't the jewelry itself. It's the willingness to do whatever necessary to protect the people you love." Danny reached across the table to take his mother's hand. "And the wisdom to accept help when you need it." "Yes," Alice agreed. "That too." As they finished dinner, Alice shared news that surprised them both. "I've been thinking about volunteering again. The community center where your AA meetings are held needs literacy tutors for their adult education program." Danny's face lit up. "Mom, that's perfect. You were born to teach. I thought maybe you could introduce me to some of the staff when I come to your meeting Thursday night. Make the whole thing feel less intimidating." The conversation drifted to other plans. Danny's daughter Emma would visit for Thanksgiving. Alice was considering the senior wellness program at the community center. They were both looking forward to the completion of their jewelry restoration project. As the evening wound down, they sat in Alice's living room with coffee and the comfortable silence of people who no longer feared each other's judgments. The apartment felt different now, not smaller and cramped, but cozy and filled with the warmth of genuine connection. "Danny," Alice said finally, "I need to tell you something I should have said years ago. When you were using, I was so focused on trying to save you that I forgot to see you. The man you are now, the man you were even then underneath the addiction. You're someone I genuinely like, not just love because you're my son." Danny's eyes filled with tears. "That might be the best thing anyone's ever said to me." "Well, it's true. You're kind, hardworking, thoughtful. You make me laugh. You're the kind of person I would choose as a friend even if we weren't family." Outside, the autumn evening settled over their neighborhood like a benediction. Alice thought of Robert, of how proud he would be of the man their son had become and the relationship they had built together. The jewelry in her bedroom drawer represented more than monetary value now. It symbolized the possibility of restoration, the power of patience, and the truth that some things, once thought lost, could be recovered through love and honest effort. As Danny prepared to leave, Alice walked him to the door with the easy affection of someone no longer afraid of being seen as needy or burdensome. "Same time next week?" he asked, a question that had become both practical planning and emotional reassurance. "I'll be here," Alice replied, and both of them understood that the promise encompassed more than just Sunday dinner. After Danny left, Alice returned to her jewelry box, touching each recovered piece with gratitude. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: managing her medications, attending physical therapy, learning to navigate the complex systems of aging with dignity. But tonight, surrounded by the restored treasures of her family's history and the deeper treasure of her son's trust, Alice Peterson felt rich indeed. The weight of gold had taught them both that some things were worth fighting for, that love expressed through truth was stronger than love hidden in protection, and that families could heal when they learned to support each other instead of suffering alone. In the quiet of her small apartment, Alice could almost hear the voices of all the women who had worn these pearls before her, and she knew that the legacy would continue, not just in jewelry passed down through generations, but in the harder wisdom of learning to love without fear, to trust without guarantee, and to build bridges strong enough to support the weight of imperfect, honest, enduring love. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote,